we're good.
Hi, I'm Chris Henschel, Chief Operations Officer with Perfect Video Conferencing, and we'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Clouds, Consultations, and Collaboration, Making Your Unified Communications Clear. Today's discussion is going to be led by Mark Richards of Kaliotek, and Kaliotek specializes in IT and security services for dynamic technology, life sciences, and service organizations centered in the Bay Area. They specialize in complex network and system design and implementation for demanding applications. And we also have in the discussion today Randy Marcotte, Chief Executive Officer of Perfect Video Conferencing. And Perfect Video Conferencing specializes in helping companies cost-effectively leverage truly unified communications. The ability to provide expert consulting stems from a desire to share a culture of innovation and business that may not recognize how enterprise-grade video can change business communications. So Mark and Randy, thank you for leading this conversation. And we'd like to kick it off a little bit here to throw out some questions to both of you to understand the topic a little bit deeper. What are the key challenges, call it maybe 3 or 5 thoughts, that you see when the data infrastructure is not done correctly? And I guess, Mark, if you want to talk about what you see from that perspective, we'll start with you.
You bet. First, just let me note that Kaliotek is a customer of Perfect Video Conferencing. We have been for many years, as well as a partner, and they have helped us with many of our clients setting up great video conferencing. We use the life-size units and use it on the cloud as well. It's been very important for us to have our distributed company work together. We are heavy users of video with our offices in the East Coast as well as Southern California, and it's very important to our culture. But to answer your question more directly, so I think one of the things we see in people that adopt video conferencing is that the networking aspect tends to be an afterthought, and they start thinking about that when it is when they're having problems, as opposed to thinking it up front. So proper planning of the network is very important for good performance, so that you don't end up trying to troubleshoot the equipment and other services when in fact it's really a network problem. That make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Randy, I wonder if you have some thoughts to take off on that same question.
I do. 3 to 5 is a good starting point. I would say that for us, with the evolution of a number of the video conferencing codecs, the way videos get compressed, many of our customers come to the table thinking, well, if I've done it on my mobile phone, I don't need to be concerned about the network. And candidly, they call it plumbing. So I think that points to Mark's idea that this is an afterthought. It is essential. So when you want it to do well in your organization, best effort networks can do fine, again, because the technology has improved so much. But once it gets so adopted, we then have the questions about the density. And so on a network, we are concerned about bandwidth, and then if we're concerned about bandwidth, we're then looking at class of service or quality of service. It for us also points to the type of equipment that you're using. There are certain cameras that can process the video image and maybe do some color saturation that does a visual impact on the video call. But again, if you're not sending the packets fast enough, you're going to have problems from the get-go. So I think the top one is it shouldn't be an afterthought, to Mark's point. The next one for me is that bandwidth does matter, which then points a little bit towards class of service. I know you said 3 to 5, so I'll add a fourth, is that in considering networks, we're not the networking shop. We'll go to Kalio to help with that. In considering networks, our customers oftentimes get a little bit of paralysis because they feel like it's too expensive to fix the problems that are in front of them, or they think it's too complicated. Where do I find the smoking gun, or how do I give this a priority in a network? And so the fear of the unknown, or the fear of opening up Pandora's box, like if I start looking at the quality of my network switching, am I going to be screwed and don't have the budget for more video conferencing? I have to say that fear of looking under the hood is one of the biggest challenges we have to have an effective video conferencing solution, mostly because there's a wired network that we prefer, and there's a wireless network. So I'll tap out at 5 saying that if you're going to do a network, do it right, and make sure if you're going to do video over Wi-Fi, give that a second or third or a fourth cautionary thought. And then if you're going to do it, get the right equipment, because then you're going to yell at me for your video calls failing. But I'm going to point at your crappy access point from Best Buy, and you're going to need to do better than that. So I think, Chris, like you asked in the question to just stick to 5, so I could go on forever, like I sometimes like to do. I'll hand it back to you and wait for my slides. All
right. One of the other things we're wondering about is, can you comment on some of the do's and don'ts of network and unified communication? I know you just talked about it a little bit, touched on it, and I know that you get a little bit deeper later on in your presentations about it. But I was wondering if you could give a little snapshot for those who might not be able to stay through the entire webinar, just of some of the things that you feel are really called out as do's and don'ts in that area. And this time we'll start with you, Randy, to kick it off.
Sure. In the grand scheme of, on the video conferencing side, do's and don'ts, I think, Mark, I'll pause on any of the opinions I might render for free on the networking side, because you're the subject matter expert there. With that, I'll also say, I learned a lot of what I know in this space because of the relationship with Kalio. We did a ShoreTel system for them, not only for them, but a lot of their customers. And then watching Kalio take a regimented approach to planning, execution, and then testing and follow-up, for me, really helped us go to that perfect video conferencing standard. So on the video conferencing side, it's really make sure you know what you're getting yourself into is first the do's, and do throw video into your network. I would say the snapshot on that is don't expect it to go flawlessly if you don't have some fairly large internet connections. And most of the video protocols and video conferencing bridge services will speak out to the internet. So you can scroll. I'm just going to go to our website a little bit, and you can see a number of opportunities for products that we look at. Each one of these providers and services have some range of IP addresses or ports and protocols that need to be reviewed. Coming from inside a network to out in a video call, you'll likely have success, but that whole likely have success can bite you if the call fails, if you've got a firewall rule blocking what's needed for content sharing. So your CEO goes into a room and just wants the thing to work like a projector and wants to collaborate, and if suddenly gets a black box and it shows on his laptop and it's not on the screen, those of us in IT or support or training, we're the ones who get the your heads on a platter call. So don't ignore the firewall, really. We've got a couple of blog posts, too, that really list in finer detail some of the do's and don'ts. But lighting, for example, we did this webinar as an example. So Chris is on a camera that's behind a window, and that window is giving us some front-facing lighting. And you can see that washes him out just a little bit. It's not bad, but that particular camera also does some color saturation. Mine, while I am a little bit shiny because of the bald head, this is a true to color. If you were in the room, this is what it would look like. I really do have a busy-looking desk like this. And in Mark's, by design, we don't have any front-facing lighting. So you can see in this video call, choosing a good camera makes a difference. This one can pan, tilt, and zoom and do all sorts of crazy fun things. So can Mark's. Chris's is a static camera. So do choose the right camera for the right room. Don't bypass those questions about the quality of what the camera can do and the quality of the lighting. And I guess the final one I would add in there, Chris, it comes down to the audio experience. So we think of all conference rooms as video conferencing rooms. The reality of it is many of the conference rooms are just places for people to talk to each other. They don't need the content sharing. But when they do need content sharing, you need to make it one button projector-like easy. Make it idiot-proof, right? And then they're also going to do audio calls. So this particular life-size system is tied to our VoIP system, ShoreTel, so I can make a phone call. And so in the do's and don'ts, to your question, and the way I'd focus that is that ultimately know your end users, so do ask them. Don't be at the sort of the behest of them or held hostage by your end user community, but do know what they need and make sure the rooms are designed accordingly. And then with audio, make sure that you've got good audio, because the death of a video conference call is crappy audio, and the quality of the microphone, much to Mark's choice he's actually on a life-size gear too. When we did the testing in his 2 environments, he had an end user back east that likes to walk and talk, and then or sort of whiteboard as they're talking. And that person, who's very important for the content being delivered at the Kaliotek world, isn't going to change their behavior, nor are your end users. So you need to have microphones that tune themselves to the end user and then get the heck out of the way. You don't want the technology to be an inhibitor to the meeting, but you need audio to work. So again, it's choose the right infrastructure, the cameras, know the lighting is important, and make sure that your microphone can do its job and your speaker is quality. I have about 10,000 others that I would do and don't, but again, you're asking me to keep it brief, which is a struggle for me and a core competence. So at that point, I will pass, I think, back to you or to Mark for those do's and don'ts.
Well, actually, let's check with Mark and see what his thoughts are on some of the do's and don'ts.
Well, I'll just summarize it, and I'll go into a little more detail later. But Randy mentioned the networking gear. Yeah, we find a lot of folks using consumer quality networking gear, and so that's a don't. If you really want good quality of video conferencing, you've got to have commercial grade. If you have wireless, you have to make sure you have. If you're using wireless for video, you have to make sure that you have sufficient coverage, and I'll speak to that a bit. If you're doing point to point like we are, in terms of if a company is doing internal communications and has video conference rooms in different offices, then the use of a software-defined WAN is an important item to make sure that you get high quality, because those are going to be frequent and important meetings to have high quality. There's network segmentation to make sure that you got good segmentation going to your conference rooms is important, and also the what we call quality of service settings on the networking gear as well as the internet service provider. That's kind of a high level of summary of the areas that are important to touch when you're setting up a video conference, and I'll speak to more to those into the slides.
Okay, great.
Chris, Mark and I had said that if there was something that he said that triggered him for a follow-up, he'd do it or I would. And Mark, the network segmentation one for us is an emerging trend. So we don't dabble in this a lot, but we see the outcomes of people not planning for good network segmentation. So they're doing lots of real-time hoggy, cloggy, Slack-like or life-size-like applications, and they didn't plan for it. So suddenly their CRM or their online QuickBooks is lagging. So there are implications to dumping everything in a flat network. And ultimately, I think people think QoS settings are too expensive to deploy and then too complicated to manage. I would render an opinion that they're not. When you've got more than 15 people, it's probably critical. So, Chris, thanks for letting me interject.
Sure. What are the other things I wanted to get your thoughts on? Can you talk about what's happening with your customers given the vast amount of cloud options that are out there? It seems there are more and more out there for them to choose from, and what are you seeing in the marketplace, and what are some of your thoughts on it?
Mark, do you want to go first about the cloud options, or should I go?
You go ahead, Randy. Sure. You take it.
We find ourselves sort of keen to about 10 or 11 of the cloud options that are out there, and that's a lot for someone to digest if they're just essentially trying to find out how to solve a unified communications challenge. And then just today I got asked to speak to an analyst, and on the list of some of the usual suspects were 3 others emerging from the Asia Pac and Europe that I hadn't even heard of. And I'm perfect video conferencing, and I'm a guy who sort of finds it keen to know what's going on here. So even though I'd like to consider myself a subject matter expert in this space, there's still stuff coming to market. And over at Infocom last week, there were 3 new providers in small booths in the corner looking to take on the Blue Jeans, the Life Size, the Zooms, the larger well-known brands that are out there. And so the it's head-spinningly confusing. And then a number of the freemium software, so a lot of the clients that Mark and I run into are already Google shops, or they're already Microsoft shops, and from Google you can now get free video conferencing, and from Microsoft you're getting Skype, soon to be Teams. And so there's a messaging of, you already own Cisco gear, why wouldn't we throw Spark in there with it? So the customers that we're seeing are wondering, if I'm already paying X for this infrastructure, why wouldn't I just get video conferencing for free? And where's the teeter-totter between free and good enough, and potentially better than good enough, so that the end user can have an immersive experience? And I think that's the key thing for me, is that free sometimes comes with pain points that are not seen or prepared for. And then as a reseller and as a systems integrator, sometimes I don't like free because I cannot make money. And the customer doesn't get an experience that works for them. Yeah.
We certainly see a lot of the same type of thing, where you really can't avoid multiple solutions, because you have partners and you have customers and they want to use something. So you encounter all kinds of things. And so there's no question that you're going to have to use Zoom and Google and at some point in your experience. But I think it is important for a company to have a standard that you use for important meetings and sales calls and internal meetings, so that otherwise it's a free-for-all and everyone has their favorite. So it's important for someone to make a decision. I think that's a key executive role. This is an important technology now. It's not a peripheral technology, and someone's got to make a decision to say, this is our corporate standard. And yeah, you're going to use all those others, but they're not going to. You definitely suffer, and you don't want to have important meetings on those, unless you have a real tried and true setup and infrastructure.
All right, thanks, Mark. So we scratched the surface on a little bit of what you two wanted to cover today. We'll dive now into a little bit of your presentations and let you dig deeper on some of the initial thoughts you shared with us. So Mark, we'll start with you and talk about how Kalio does what they do and what the magic they bring to the table.
Sure. So we've set up hundreds and hundreds of networks over the years, and we're dealing with a lot of startup companies as well as more mature companies that are moving perhaps and relocating. It's amazing to me that it's very easy for a startup company to run to the store and grab some consumer grade networking stuff to get started. But it is amazing to me how many times we come back 2 years later and they're still using the same gear. It can't be supported remotely. It's got all kinds of it's a source of many problems and much frustration, and sometimes the users don't even know that's the source of the problem. So we definitely recommend as soon as you can to get some reasonable networking gear from Cisco or Meraki. The brand is great, HP. And get out of that consumer grade network, you will have all kinds of problems with it, and it will be difficult to support. So I think that's number one. And obviously on it's many times overlooked because it's been in place and it seems to be working fine for your standard application. So that is number one. You can't have great video conferencing without some decent gear. So you bite the bullet there. I mentioned wireless coverage. A couple of metrics here. You've got in some of the companies today, we have a pretty dense packing of people in a bench-like scenario, and if people are using video or using wireless networking primarily, and then they're just expecting video to work, that can be a real problem. You may have to increase the number of wireless access points to make sure that you have enough, say going from something like one from every 5,000 square feet for low usage to one in every 1,500 square feet. So that is you got to beef up those if you're going to be using wireless from the desktop or from the laptop extensively. Okay, you can go to the next slide then. I mentioned this, that many of our customers have multiple sites, and rather than relying on the plain old internet, it is important to have some kind of a dedicated connection there. Now, the new generation of software-defined wide area networks, or SD-WAN, are very accessible. They're not expensive, and they replace some of this older technology that that has been very expensive for companies to glue their wide area networks together. So something like a VeloCloud, we've had good success with. They were acquired by VMware, and that is a good low cost way to use low cost bandwidth to get a redundant connection and to have all your offices connected together. We use them amongst our offices, so you really have a one network. It's operating as one big network rather than having to connect to remote networks. So that's very important for high quality inter-office communications if you're in that problem. We mentioned network segmenting, but it is very common, as we said earlier, for a startup company just to put in their basic networking. It's all flat. It's all using the same network. It works fine when you're small. You start adding people, and people start using more cloud applications, and then you start having problems. So it is important to segment the network, and that can be done in the firewall if you have a reasonable firewall quite readily. It's not complicated. It just you might want to segment your network or your engineers off from the business side of things, and you definitely want to segment if you have a room, a conference room that is using a lot of video conferencing, put it on a separate virtual VLAN, and that'll eliminate bottlenecks that you might encounter from someone like some of the users of streaming applications or perhaps watching Netflix in their free time. That's important.
Mark, I'm monitoring chat too, and I did notice one that came in about VLANs, because we both have mentioned them now for some time. Actually, this chat is, how long does it typically, they just added to this, how long does it typically take to look at and deploy an SD-WAN, and how long does it typically take to deploy, if you have a flat network, just a baseline VLAN infrastructure to do 1, 2, and 3 kind of categories, if you want to give a ballpark of, they didn't say if the person in chat would have to give a sense of their time, the number of employees, but that's vague. But if you can give a sense of timelines, I think someone's curious how to do that.
Yeah, so I'm not a network engineer myself, but it kind of depends on the complexity of the network already, of course, and the number of things involved. But it's really it's not a complex process. So it's something you could probably do in a short number of hours to make sure it's done right and test it and make sure all the traffic is flowing correctly. It's not a big project, I wouldn't say. So that's for the VLANs. The SD-WANs, we have customers that have lots of locations, 30 or 40 or 50 locations, and when they open a new branch office, for example, we'll just send them a pre-configured device for this SD-WAN, a pre-configured VeloCloud device that you can hook up, and it just works fine. So that's again, it's a small, probably a small number of hours to set up, and way easier than the old technologies that you would have to do to glue different locations together.
Yeah, well said. From my perspective, we've seen a VLAN take months to deploy, but it's only because the vendor who's touching the change control isn't in line with the customer's demand. So it's more about the human process than it is about the technical knowledge. So to design a good VLAN infrastructure on a wallboard and a collaboration document isn't going to take more than a couple hours. To actually get it done in the organization depends on a ton of factors. And so in some of the more headachy kind of spaces, we've seen one of those edge devices from the SD-WAN providers get shipped out, and they're literally no bigger than a notebook. So you send that in front of your internet connection, and suddenly your end users on a new prem or an existing prem get the value of some priority for video or priority for QuickBooks. So the problem is easy to solve. The execution of solving the problem can sometimes be a process issue or a collaboration issue. But as Mark said, I would agree with him. This is a fairly easy problem to solve if you've got the right quarterback, and I've seen no better than Kaliotek for this.
Excellent point. Yeah, the human element and then making the decisions is different than the technical execution. For sure.
Yeah, and I'd say if you've got any more questions on chat, I know Chris will be monitoring those as well. Send them in. But thanks for that question. It seemed relevant, Mark. So I'm glad I brought it in. I know you've got, I think, one last piece here.
Yeah. Just the quality of service settings is something where you can set the priority of traffic on the network. Again, the VLANs helps you, but this is something that I think is necessary now with so much opportunity for people to use bandwidth for social media, for streaming media that may or may not be work related, and then you have mission critical applications that the company needs to prioritize. So this is your opportunity to go in and set the rules for what gets priority, and something like a real-time application like video conferencing, you need to have highly prioritized. Again, this is one of those things that can take a fair amount of conversation internally to plan. It's helpful if you do it early in the life cycle of the company, so that you're not dealing with as many people and opinions, for sure. But it's something that ISPs and commercial networking gear will allow you to do, and a network engineer can again accomplish that fairly routinely. The conversations of priority are of course important, and may have different voices input into that. So really, those are that's the high level of the things we look for in terms of consulting with folks on this. We can hit some of these architectural points and understand where some of the problems might be quite quickly, just in a conversation, knowing what the architecture is, and then actually going in and fixing things. It depends a lot on the situation. But we've had a good success with providing high quality video with a proactive approach, as Randy mentioned, by having a little bit of planning up front. It's not rocket science.
All right. Well, thanks, Mark. Randy, I wonder if you want to tackle the same thing. Tell us a little bit about the special sauce that Perfect Video Conferencing brings to the table, and some of your thoughts about some of the same things.
Will do. We like to make it easy, and I hope by viewing this webinar and the live stream and doing some chatting, folks are able to see that this technology doesn't have to be prohibitive or complicated. So while I, at a 10,000 foot level, agree that in Mark's premise that you need to have a network plan, I'm going to welcome the opportunity to go into a network that you've just thrown out there, you've just done anything, you don't have any plan, you don't know what to do, and you still want to test video conferencing. So I don't want anything that we talk about as best practices today to stop you from at least firing it up and seeing what happens, because you're not going to kill anyone by doing a video call. So the harm that you can do is minimal, and the benefits that you can get are great. And then if stuff does start hitting the fan and it's spraying all over everyone, we can clean it up with you. So there's no harm in trying. If what we're saying today about best practices makes you feel like, oh crap, I'm not ready, anyone with an internet connection on a mobile device is ready. But when we started Perfect Video Conferencing, it wasn't really based on the premise that just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. To do it right, it should be also optimized. So the conference room itself can have some AV integration, and that's one of our key specialties. That where does the wire go, and how does it connect, and what's the user experience? And then in your organization, are there ways to train the user that helps for better adoption? So the more we train a user, I think one of our secret sauce items is that we pay attention to the adaptation to the technology, not just the adoption of the technology, because business practices are going to have to shift a little bit. Some people don't like to be on camera. Shocking to me as a video conferencing provider, but then we're gonna want to train them how to turn it on or turn it off, or I might need to eat my lunch during a meeting that you've scheduled because of the time differences, and so you don't need to see me eat lunch. So there's all sorts of behavioral shifts in an organization. I think once the video conferencing infrastructure is in place, there's a question too about how do we then use it for other parts of the business? So there are some best practices in the organization about training. Well, do you record that training and then have your new employees see it, rather than bringing in that expensive trainer for the fourth and fifth cycle of new employee turn? So you might be buying video conferencing so that you can reduce the number of travel hours or increase the culture exchange within your organization. Those are all great and traditional models for video conferencing adoption. But beyond that there are some best practices and cultural things you'll want to look at. So the best practices of home office support and whether or not you're going to do it, or the cultural relationships of when people meet and how they meet and where they're showing content and who's bringing the slides. So if you don't consider those and you throw video conferencing out there, you'll do fine. But you're going to have a certain subset of disgruntled users, and we all know the rule of compliments and complaints. Those of your 80% of your users that are super happy are just going to be super happy and not tell you that you've done a great job. Those few people who are the Nancy negatives, you're going to hear from them all of the time. They're going to reject any new thing you bring in all of the time. So we like to look at the I'm recording this, but I'm going to say it anyways. We like to look at the village idiot and plan for that person, and our customers are pretty good about reinventing the village idiot. We'll also work with you to solve around, but not be held hostage by the most challenging users. And it is really something to consider. I already covered this. I'm not the guy who likes to read slides in all of their detail. Actually, I did the same. I already did that because it's the same slide twice. Great. A little bit about our background, too, is that we have a strong consortium of partners, and then we guarantee our services. So there's something about us as an AV integrator that sets us apart. We shouldn't make money on a project if it fails for you in its adoption, and we can review that guarantee with any of the folks who are interested in a video conferencing supply. I'm willing to take that risk because I believe in what we do, and we created a brand that is about getting it right, not just about trying. And then, as we said in the beginning part of this, we typically like to look at solving a problem when we're engaging with someone. So that middle point there of let's solve a problem and get a demonstrable return. Our best clients are the ones that come to us and say, I'm trying to fix X, and I think video conferencing will help. What's the right pathway? Because when you have so many options, it might be a feature war at the desktop. And there are some of the cameras and codec solutions that just don't have a terribly robust desktop sharing. And if the problem you're looking to solve is a remote GoToMeeting sort of assist technology and not a conference room and a content sharing, that's going to drive you towards a solution that is better fitted for the problem you're looking to primarily solve. Once you've solved that problem, though, like I said a couple of slides ago, you're going to look beyond today's problems to tomorrow's opportunities. When I mentioned this earlier, I said there's a teeter-totter effect. Many of the hardware providers or software providers will come to this as, here's my way of doing it, and here's your way of doing it. And the balance there in the bottom part of the four-slided thing is like, well, who wins? Is it the features of the software or the video conferencing platform? Is it the customer demands? I'd like to say that my team and I and the partners like Kaliotek do a good job of using our mouths and ears in the right proportion, and not as much demonstrated by a webinar, but we tend to like to listen to what's happening in our customers' ecosystems and then design based on that. And it has to be a balance. And the balance is end users, it's cost, it's complexity, it's network. So there's a host of things that really lead to that. And then in the perfect video conferencing world, we do like to look at kind of the traditional pain points, but we don't like to think of those as the only way of framing a solution. So when we're looking at meeting adoption and content sharing, so I'll point out the multitasking function. That is something that we just have to accept in the workspace, or create a culture, or we single task for the shorter meeting. But many people come into meetings expecting that they're going to check their email or have their devices on. And so if that's part of what video conferencing enables, turn off your camera or turn on your camera, or choose a software that lets you see that the user shifted from the video call to an application that isn't related to the meeting at hand or the training at hand. So you as a moderator could then see what kind of behavior is happening. And then as an organization, you can look at that as a behavioral change issue and a coaching issue, not as much as is video conferencing working? So we should start with video conferencing is going to work. We are going to have great meetings, but when can we justify the investment? And the host of these factors that we'd be glad to talk to you through that really proves that long-term ROI. And then on that point, I won't read the slide, but I wanted to record it. It's ultimately, we look at what is the business challenge and what is the traditional video conferencing fix. So there's a host of ways at which you can look at the problems you're looking to try to solve. And then to that bottom point there is, can video conferencing and collaboration help solve those problems? So that's going to be a way in which, if you are simply looking to connect 6 offices with cameras and microphones and speakers, that's a great opportunity for us. We'll take that business and be happy to be a great partner for you. But beyond that, once you've done what used to be very complicated and is today is quite simple to pull off, there are going to be other things that, now that you've done it, what do you do with it? And that really becomes the key thing. I don't like to do a webinar without some reference to what the prime directive of the internet is, and that's cat videos, of course. So in the event that this isn't content that fits your needs for today, I wanted to give my contact information. Chris, I think if I'm tracking the agenda right, after I talked a little bit about this, we wanted to move back to some Q&A.
Yeah, we had some questions that came in, actually for both you and Mark.
Okay.
Mark, I'll start for one that came in regarding Kalio services. They're looking for IT staff to supplement their team on key projects. What would you need to know about the company to start looking at that?
Well, we just have a consultative call just to understand what skill sets they have and lack. And we often do that kind of a model where we support the IT team with the skill sets that they don't necessarily have, or it could just be capacity they don't have. Many IT groups are so stretched these days, just trying to keep the lights on and keep things working. And if there's a project, particularly with the new technology that comes in that they don't have skill in, it takes a lot more time and is error prone. So we're pretty good at coming in, having the right expertise to do it quickly and professionally, and then we can train that team to support that going forward. So we really like the idea of a wraparound group. I've never met an IT team that said they had enough resources. Having an A team on the side that can be called in when you're needed to, and then go away when they're not needed is something we do really well.
Good. All right. Randy, a question came in regarding Perfect Video Conferencing. Somebody did a little research on us. It looks like you support a lot of services. How do you choose the right one?
And we're probably going to be adding more, and it's an ever-changing market. To choose the right one really comes down to a sort of a Venn overlap of costs, features, what you currently have, what you'll need in the future. So it is a consultative approach. Ultimately, though, within a couple of minutes of the customer describing what they're going to choose or what they're needing to fix, what problems they have in their organization, what opportunities they have for growth, that's going to narrow the field from 10 to 3 or 4. The next step for us is, because the manufacturers know that it's a crowded space, they know that the cloud is cloudy, they're going to offer up and cough up free demos and manufacturer resources to do that bake-off. So we like to be the quarterback on not only sort of narrowing the field initially, but then having that testing period be vetted within the right people. Certainly the traditional one was get a camera, get a demo kit, buy a solution, and it could be a couple of days or a couple of weeks solution, and not look over the fence, because IT folks can sometimes come in with a long-term experience of LifeSize or Cisco or something, and they know what they know, and that's great. Again, if they feel confident and they're going to rest their paycheck and their neck on a solution that they've historically understood, fine. But in today's market, we're seeing customers come to us a little bit more with I know what I know. I know there's something to be explored. We like to answer that with, well, across our customer base, here's the other things we see, and do they add any value to you? Because then that'll help us focus. So desktop collaboration tools, that's one whole segment. Campers and conference rooms, that's another segment, and they used to not exist in the same space. So the GoToMeetings, the Citrix, the LogMeIns, they were all in sort of we don't care about the camera space. The LifeSize and the Polycoms, they were in we love the camera, and why would you care about the desktop? And now those are starting to overlap. So that's where some of the confusion comes in. And really, if a client is already buying something, we'd want to know what they like or don't like about it. And if a client is getting stuff for free, we'll want to see what kind of value is there. That'll be our starting basis. What are you already using? What do you get for free? And our hope is that we don't have them spend any new money on a solution with perfect video conferencing. We'll take expenses they have elsewhere and reinvest it in better technology and get so don't spend any more money, spend the same money you're already spending, but just spend it differently, obviously, with me or us. Right?
All right. So, Mark, it looks like the next one is for you. The person says, we're looking for, or my team is talented, but I have a problem with latency for VoIP in my network. Can you find the smoking gun? And what does it look like on the time to find a root cause on something like that when you go after it?
Got it. So oftentimes this can be solved at an architectural level in a conversation. You know, some of the things we've been through already. Just having a conversation with the team about that. See, sometimes there's an obvious answer to that pops out right away. Now, if they've already sort of checked those boxes and have looked there, the problem with latency is that it can come and go, right? You can test it at one moment, which you can do at any time, and it's fine. But then the boss comes in and there's an important board meeting or something, and suddenly things don't work right, of course, by Murphy's Law. So then you need to monitor it over a period of time. So we can install a monitor program on a computer within the network there that can monitor the traffic for, say, 24 hours might be a good snapshot, or if it's a weekly cycle, you might need to go longer than that, and just collects data, and then you can take a look at that data and see pretty clearly what's happening at that moment in time that you had the problems, and then usually you can sort it out from there. So it's really just setting up a simple monitor, letting it cook for a while, and then coming back with some scaled interpretation like that.
All right, great.
Chris, I had one that came in during that too about, can you be a little bit more specific about some of the do's and don'ts? We're sort of near the time slot on this, so I'm going to go ahead and reference a blog post that we have about designing a video conferencing room specifically, because the question that came in wasn't as specific about, is it architecture, is it the product of choice? So head to our blog and take a look at the do's and don'ts on designing the AV side. So we've got a nice punch list here, and certainly just send us an email through the webinar invite if this isn't sufficient. We'd be glad to hook you up with more.
Great. There was a question that came in for you, Randy, and the person talks about, we recognize you work with video conferencing in the conference room, but how does our work plug into the workflow and the overall unified communications plan for the customer?
It used to not really, because I'm building a conference room. That's a good question. The workflow and unified communications. So I put on my ShoreTel hat a little bit on this, is because I was so excited when ShoreTel was beating the market with a unified communication, a desktop client that showed presence and showed you one click to call. So the term unified communications, quite frankly, started from the PBX world. The idea that you have your phone here, you've got your cell phone, you've got your CRM, and a lot of these things just did not connect. So in my ShoreTel history, I got excited about a phone system that could connect to your website, that could connect to your partners, and there was instant messaging. And now anyone can do that. So the unified communication space has really become like air or water. Everyone's doing it. But then what I'm seeing emerging, beyond choosing Lifesize or Zoom or Blue Jeans or Pexip or Starleaf, and the list goes on and on. It's like, once you've chosen them, is that a silo that stands on its own? Can it connect to my subset of users in an acquisition that use Slack, or a partner that uses Skype for Business, Teams? So where are these independent closed loop silos connecting to other platforms? And that's a key consideration, because if I'm going to choose a horse and ride it in my organization, do I then block out other people? And then I use Salesforce or Autotask or a CRM that I'm touching a conversation with Mark already over video. Why am I not dipping into that information or feeding that through some APIs or SDKs? And that's really the emerging space for us in unified communications. You choose a video platform, and then what else can it do? I know this is no time for commercials, but we built a platform called Hitch Video. And in the Hitch Video platform, what we're looking to do is that second opinion consult. So I'm already assuming video, but what medical or legal database am I tipping into, and where am I writing that record for later extraction and better forensics? So there are things under the SDK side, the software development kits, or things under the application interface, the APIs, that really are exciting once you've chosen a platform, because you can have it do more in your organization. And for most ITs folks, they say, oh crap, I just got more work. So we don't want the excitement of what you can do in a unified communications create a fear of the lack of ability to execute, because these kits are easy to deploy. They're drag and drop GUI widgets, kind of wikis that make it easy to integrate.
Okay. Somebody's got their financial hat on here. Do you
Mark.
Consultation? It's a question we got. So I guess that'll go to both of you.
Do you want me to start, Mark? If you'll pay for a consultation, we can charge.
No, we always do a quick. We'll certainly do a consultation to understand the requirements and the needs, and make whatever suggestions we can without charge. And if we have to come on site and do some more detailed diagnosis, then we may have to charge there.
Yeah, Chris has joked, and as many of my colleagues is like, well, Randy, you give it away for free for so quickly. How would you expect someone to pay? I am, and my team is keen to talk about this stuff till you're blue in the face, and then maybe we show up later, blue in the face. We love this stuff, so yes, we will engage for free initially. But when we're driving somewhere, or when we're doing for you, out of respect for our time and yours, we do like to consult for a fee. We've got both models, and your problem will help define that, and the scope of your problem will help define the price.
Well, I know we're nearing the end of the time that we had set aside for this. I wanted to check in with either of you two if you had any additional thoughts based on what we've talked about so far. And Randy, I know you're checking chat see if there's any additional questions that came in.
A couple of things came in through the LinkedIn feed, but all of those are requests for follow-ups. They look like questions that really would be better rendered. Someone asked, how am I going to win the life-size kit? That's a great question. And there's up for dibs today was life-size kit and a Logitech kit. So we're going to take not only the registrants, but also the people that showed up, and then people who viewed the webinar within a week. We're going to take those, weight those, because obviously if you've shown up today, your votes in the pool, your tickets to the queue. Once we have those 40 or 50 or so people in the queue, I guess I'll put them on a piece of paper and have one of the techs pull a ticket out of the hat. So give us about a week to figure out the scoring on that, and then we'll reach out to you if you're the winner chicken dinner. And then the other things on LinkedIn, I'll just send there's some questions about how to get a recorded copy of it. We'll render one of those out on our website. I know Mark's going to send a copy to folks, so thank you for asking for that. And then the final one was, if we were to look to engage, what's the typical engagement cycle? That one's worth saying here. So for us, we can find out if there's a fit within 20 to 30 minutes. So we can be quick about whether or not we're the right culture for each other. And then Mark's got a form on his website to contact them. Mark, I don't know if you want to comment on that last one, is like, how long does it take to figure out if there's a fit?
Oh, yeah, certainly just a conversation is fine. You have 30 to 60 minutes, depending on the complexity of the organization. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would ask that you come a little bit prepared. So what have you liked? What have you looked at? What did you think about? So where are you in your discovery process? And again, as I've put out during the midst of this, is what problem are you trying to solve? The better you are at articulating the company need and the problem you're trying to solve, the more you're going to keep me focused. And clearly that's an objective for everyone. Mark, thank you very much. We often
thanks for having me.
As our own, as a subject matter expert. It's great to have a partner like Kaliotek in the world, and so thank you for bringing your expertise to the table. Chris, back to you to wrap up.
Yeah, well, thank you everybody for either attending or watching the recorded webinar, and we'll get back to you with the winners of those prizes today.
Cheers.
Cheers.